So we've been talking this year off and on as our theme is love God, love others. We've been talking about being salt and light. And last week David talked about small groups. And the whole reason we want to do small groups is we want you to find a place for you to be encouraged and to be an encouragement. And I think as a congregation, not just because I grew up here, but I think we do a pretty good job of encouraging one another, and yet I also know that some of you feel like we don't. Some of you feel like we've let you slip through the cracks. We don't notice you when you need noticed. And so, we always want to make sure we're doing that. And also understand that, we're a family, and sometimes we drop the ball and sometimes we do that. But when we talk about loving others and loving God, and we talk about being salt and light, sometimes I want to ask, what do we do with the salt and light? Where do we put it? Some of you as husbands have been in that, where you're looking for something. Ladies, do you understand what we do? We go and we open the cabinet and we're like, where's the salt? Where's the milk? And she says, right there. And we're like, we don't see it. And so that's kind of what I thought when we came up with this title. Oh, I have to make it on, don't I? There we go. So our verse today, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:13 through 16. We're going to spend a lot of time on salt because that's where I got stuck. We're also going to not go into light a whole lot because my wife put a roast in the oven to make sure that you didn't have to listen to a long sermon. So you can thank her for that as well, okay? So when we talk about salt, when we talk about God asking us to be salt and light, where does salt where does it work best? When we talk about salt, what is the point? And I want you to look at the next verse. This is in Matthew 28. The 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Anytime we have a missionary come and talk to us, we see this verse. On Mission Sunday in October, we'll be talking about how we're using some funds to send those out or to support those that are already out there. I've had several conversations in the last probably month and a half, 2 months, with folks that are American people wanting to go to another country. And I, personally, not in big support of that, depending on the situation, because we know that so many people in those countries do a better job than we do. It's actually better economically. We can put more people on the ground with the dollars. But we use this verse. But I want you to look at this verse and what it says. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey. The first thing it says is to go. And that's what we want to talk about today, but I don't want to talk about Africa. I don't want to talk about Brazil. I want to talk about leaving this building. When we talk about being salt, that's for all of us. And when we look at this, this is not just the verse for missionaries. This is a verse for all of us as disciples of Christ to go forth and make more disciples. And you don't have to go to a foreign country. I spent one day this week in Madison, Nebraska, because I go to all the exotic places, go to all the fancy places. Madison, Nebraska has about 538 kids, K-12, what Steve Bryant calls a big school. But in that school was primarily Spanish-speaking parents, including Burmese parents, because Tyson had built a chicken plant there, and then they went to Cuba, and they went to Central America, and they went to Burma to recruit people to cut chickens up. And you're sitting there in the middle of America, and you see all these people that have come there. But as we go out, it also is not about somebody from a different culture, from a different language. These are the people, he says, go out and make disciples. Notice it doesn't say Go bring people to church. Somewhere along in our history, we decided that in order to get people to become Christian, let's bring them to our church. And I don't find that in any verse. It's not wrong for you to bring somebody to church, but the idea is that we kind of want to bring them here and hope they get it and hope they soak it up. And that's not what the verses we're looking at are talking about. It says, go and make disciples. And any of you know that as we make disciples, it's just like raising our kids. That thing is not done in a day. How many of you remember having your first kid, and maybe with your first kid things went pretty good, and you said, let's have another one. That went good. Let's have another one. And some of you are like Saber and I and said if you ever had your second one first, you would have never had a second one. Right? Or your third one, or Balin's here, so we know it wasn't the fourth one. That was always a good one, right, Balin? But making disciples is not a one-time thing. Making disciples is not this one decision. Making disciples takes time. And it also doesn't say make converts. It does say baptizing them and teaching them. And notice the order. It wants us to baptize people when they become believers in Christ, but we don't wait for people to have everything in place to become a Christian. When people come to faith, they come to faith. And then it's our job for each other and for those that are new to the faith to continue to teach them, obey all the things that God has commanded us. And so we go and we make disciples and we baptize them and then we teach. And even obey is hard. And if we are going to be honest with each other, the hardest part that we have in this whole thing is that obey. And we come here on Sunday and people say, how are you? And we say, fine. And everybody knows we're not fine, but we also are afraid to ask, are you sure? Because then they might actually tell us. Right? But this is a place for us to come, not just to, come together and check something off a list, but there's a reason that we gather. So when we talk about being salt, where do we go? Who do we go to? My wife is an English teacher, my son's an English teacher, so I have to put, to whom do we go? And then what do we do? What is it to truly be salt? We read that verse and we talk about, you don't want to lose your saltiness. Okay, but if you still have your saltiness, what do you do with it? So in Matthew 10, Jesus says, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. And as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Again, it doesn't say go out and make members of a church. It says go and proclaim this message. And what salt does is salt is the one that gives that flavor to things. And what we're called to do is to proclaim the message. I was looking for a picture on Google for the I Brought One button. Y'all remember those from VBS? And some of the training we had that, if you brought one, you got a button. If you could talk your neighbors into it and tell them that you had really good cookies, you could get more, I Brought One buttons. And we kind of put that in there, and somewhere along the way, we talked about, how many people are you bringing to Christ? And I think in that time, in that day, I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, but I think our world has changed so drastically that now I think the question is, how many are you taking Christ to? And that's a different mentality. Because it's sending us out, and then what does it look like when we go out? What do we do? Now, except for some of those that are nurses, we're not healing the sick. We're not raising the dead. We're not cleansing those that have leprosy. But we're called to serve. Notice it doesn't say set up studies. It doesn't say knock on all the doors. It doesn't say do some of those things. It says to proclaim that the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven has come near, and then reach out to those people in need. Because when you do that, what do they want to know? Why are you doing this? How are you doing this? Some of you know that we had some people come through our house last Sunday, and it's a friend of mine, Bruce Plummer, who is an Assiniboine Indian out of Montana, and he runs Montana Indian Ministries. And what he does is he works with southern churches to come to Montana when they have the Indian powwows, and he asks for typically white suburban people to come and to pick up trash and to hand out water and to offer prayers for people. Because in that setting, when you're on a reservation and white people are serving anybody, it makes people ask a lot of questions, and they say, why are you doing this? And it gives them the opportunity to tell them exactly why they made that trip and exactly why they're picking up trash. Because I'm compelled by the love of Christ. And his ministry particularly is based on a lot of this. We didn't set up a tent and pass out tracts. We went and served people, and then they couldn't help but ask, why would we do that? So it says, freely you have received, freely give. What have you received? What have you given? But really, what have you received? Yesterday, we had a celebration for the life of Gene Pennington. And so many times when we come to this building and we send one of our saints on, I'm amazed at what it must be like when you have a funeral for someone that does not come from faith. Because we were sad yesterday because we're going to miss Gene. We're sad for the family that leaned so heavily into their mother and grandmother, great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother, as we talked about yesterday. But that was the only sadness here. There was not despair because we knew where Gene was going to be. I do appreciate it when we talk about, because Gene was friends with my grandmother and with so many of our saints that have gone on before us, and we always talk about they're probably playing 42, they're probably all trying to get a word in, they're all trying to do those things. What I don't really like is when they say, I know they're looking over us. I hope not. I hope when I get to heaven, I don't have to worry about y'all the rest of the time. I hope, we raise our kids to do what they can, and when I get there, I'm not going to go, I don't want to know what's going on down here. I'm good. I think we need to understand that about heaven sometimes. But what we had here yesterday was not just some grief, but we had hope. Because we could sit here and say, you know what? This is a loss of life, except there's not a loss of life. There's a transition of life. We live with this hope. And we have peace because of that hope. And also because of that hope and that peace, life here is better. We don't worry about the same things that people that don't have a faith worry about. And that, it is hard to fathom. Even though I've seen it, it's still hard to fathom. What is that like to say goodbye to someone and put them in the ground and think that's all you've got? That's done. And people want to know when they see that things are different for us. They want to know why. And so when we talk about what we have, what drives us? There's some new phones coming out, and there are some people that can't wait to tell you about their new phone. Or if any of you have driven a new car that you really like, you try to get everybody, this is the greatest car ever. Right? I don't know if that's happened in a while, but for some of us. But some of you run side businesses. Some of you run your own business, and you get tired of us talking about it sometimes. Or sports teams, when they're winning. That's all we talk about. And we're so jazzed about all those things. We're so revved up. The question is, when we talk about freely you've received, freely give, do you remember what you received? Are we living like we are children of the King? Are we living like we do have this hope and this peace and this message? How are we living? And that's what we talk about, because here at the end of the verse he says this way he says. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, but I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. See, when we can talk about Jesus, when we can talk about Christ, that makes this conversation easy. Some of you like it and some of you don't when I stand up here and make announcements and talk about our dysfunctional family. Because some of you don't really want to admit we're a dysfunctional family. And if you don't think we're a dysfunctional family, you're not paying attention. Okay? We're a messed up lot of people, which is the blessing. Because we're a messed up lot of people that God loves. We're a messed up lot of people that God has taken on as His family. We're a messed up lot of people that have been saved. And then we get here some days and we don't act like that's a great place to be. We forget why we gather. And so as we go out, are we living a life that people would even want to have? You know, are we living a life that somebody says, I want to get me some of that? Have you ever met a surly, don't look around, don't point, but have you ever met a surly person? Have you ever been a surly person? I know that's why I'm asking my family not to point. Nobody appreciates that. Nobody wants to do that, right? But have you seen those people that now there's some days, particularly in the morning, when you meet somebody with a lot of energy, not really digging that either, right? That's when you want some peace and some hope. Like, I hope you shut up this morning because I'm not ready for that. So there is sometimes when we're a little too infectious. But when you do meet those people that are so strong and that are so vibrant, you're like, man, what are they taking? What are they on? I want some of that. What are they doing? What's leading them to that kind of life? And so if we're going to be salt, we have to have that. So we talk about salt. I'm going the wrong direction every time. The best part of salt is that it's always there on the table. We don't have a lot of salt in our food. I don't salt my food a whole lot, and I forget that we have it, but anytime I'm looking for it, it's always in the same spot. And if you put right amount of salt, salt really makes a lot of things better. Like I said, I don't put a lot of salt on food, but I promise you when it's not there, I know. We used to haze each other in college, and the worst thing I thought we ever did to each other in our club was made each other eat baby food. Out of all the horrible things, baby food was the worst to me. Because I like peas and I like carrots and I like pumpkin, but I don't like it without salt. You might as well just give me caulk. It's the same thing. But just a little bit of salt goes a long way. And if it's not there, like I said, you notice when it's missing. Still going the wrong way. But here's the question. As we sit here together, when we talk about being salt that goes out, being salt where you need to be salty, well, adding salt to salt makes salt more salty. Don't say that a whole lot of times. But the reason I ask that is because what we've kind of begun to do is, I want to be a better Christian, and so I got to make sure I get to church, and we get to church so we can be better Christians, and then we just keep talking about being better Christians, and we're never doing what we're called to do because we're just talking about it. Those are wonderful graphics, by the way. I know you're very impressed. But if salt's not on the table, it can't help. And if you notice, they're in rows, so don't miss that analogy. But as we sit here in rows, what we need to make sure is that when we come together, our job is to not be saltier for each other, not to keep stacking salt upon salt, not to just keep piling it up, but it's to be salty in a place where we're called to be salty. So where do we go? What do we do? Because being here is not what we're called to do. There's a reason we come together, but it's not just to talk about how salty we are. Just to admire each other and how salty we can be. Now, there's sometimes when we've been together as family and we've gotten pretty salty. All right? That's not what we're talking about. Paul says, though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I become like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I'm not free from God's law but under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak, to win the weak. I become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share its blessings. First off, we have to understand the blessings of what the gospel is. Do we understand what has actually been done for us? Some of us that grew up in the church, even this church, sometimes have to remind ourselves that we're lost because we were raised to be not lost. We were raised to be Christians. We were raised to follow Christ. And yet we have to know. And those of you that maybe came from some really tough challenges, been through some really hard things, you understand things that some of us don't. And you have a place among those. And we have to understand when we talk about that, how are we going to be salt to those if we never take it out? Because see, the reason we come together is to not spread salt over each other, even though I think that's a place of encouragement. Our job is to go out and empty ourselves and come back here and be filled. If you bring somebody to church, I'm glad. There's nothing wrong with introducing some of your friends to this family. But my hope is that we're doing things outside of this building in such a way that people are begging to know what's going on inside the building. I want them to beg to come here. I don't want to have to ask people. I want them to look at us in our lives and see that we've got something so different and so radical that it's like, I got to know what you got and where I can get it. But if we spend all our time coming together and talk about all the things we have and never letting anybody, I could tell you about salvation, you know. You sing the same songs I do. You praise the same God I do. And the reason we come together is so that we can remind each other where we come from. So that we can come at the table and remind ourselves, this is a bond that we have with God that makes all things possible, that makes the hope, that makes the peace, that makes that freedom possible. But it's not just our job to sit here and bask in it. It's not our job just to stockpile that stuff. Our job is to come here on a regular basis as a family of God and recharge, refill, so we can go back out and spread that. And so instead of staying in the cupboard each week, what if we came in empty every Sunday? Some of us do. And it's not always that sometimes it's not that we're always spreading it, it's just that it got taken away. We just lost it. Just life is hard. That's something we need to share with each other. Nobody doesn't know that. But we don't always talk to each other about that. If you want to be encouraged here, if you want to be refilled, then we've got to be real with each other and talk about that it's not easy out there. One of the biggest challenges is when you have a Christian that believes that not only will Jesus save you, but that all things are good. And so when they go out and things are hard, then God either has forsaken me or I must not be good enough for God yet. And that's not the truth. The truth is God provides us salvation. But it doesn't make things less hard. We studied in our class this morning where they said, we want to partake in what you're partaking. We want to be with you. And he said, you don't know what you're asking. So when we come here, I want us to be able to come here, and I do want us to come as empty as possible and then refill and go back out. And so where do we do that? One of the biggest challenges I think we have is to seek relationships outside the safety of this church. We need to do a better job as a congregation to encourage one another. That's hard work too, all the time. But also we can't only depend on each other for that encouragement and then not use it to go bring others to Christ. So many of us, if you take your phone, take your Facebook friends, whatever it may be, whatever your list is, how many people on that list of friends or phone numbers or Facebook friends are people that don't have the same faith that you have? And if they don't have that same faith, how comfortable are you in building a relationship with them so that you spend enough time with them for them to see something different in you? See, I don't want you to just go out and be different. It takes time for people to see that difference because life's hard. We're out there struggling the same thing. I have dads come into schools every day. And I give a guy a sticker that says strong father. And I have a dad about once a month, once a week. Sometimes goes, how do you know I'm a strong father? I said, you look tired and broke. He goes, yeah, give me the sticker. All right? I don't sugarcoat that. If you're going to be a strong dad, that's not an easy job. I think we get better and better as a family when we come in here and we say, it was hard out there. It's not that easy out there. This is tough work. And I think we've also got to do that among people that don't always know how to get past that tough part. They don't have that hope. They don't have that joy. They don't have that peace. They don't have that freedom that we have. And so what I want you to do is I want you to look at what are the relationships that we could be building outside of our church family. It may be work. It may not be work. It may be in your neighborhood. You may be like some of us, everybody in our neighborhood, man, my neighborhood's pretty messed up. I mean, the Cadells are great, but all the other people in my neighborhood are pretty rough. And then the other challenge, which I think a lot of us, particularly the way we were raised, we have to seek out people to love, not people as projects. See, what I don't want you to do is make a goal of baptizing someone or getting 12 people to church. For us to make a difference, and I think particularly in the culture in which we live right now, we've got to see people as people. My wife and I have been through all kinds of challenges in 29 years, and y'all know that I'm all of those challenges usually. But in those 29 years, there's been a lot of things that have made a difference. And one of the things that made a difference in my marriage was the great theologian Jim Carrey. Yeah, I know. That's how deep I go, right? But in Bruce Almighty, he looks at Morgan Freeman, and he says, I want to see, talking about his girlfriend or fiance or something, wife. I don't think it was his wife. And he says, I want to see her like you see her. And I needed that message at exactly that time because that's what I was not doing for my wife. And when we go out and we come across people, I think we have to see them as well. You will come across homeless people that need a drink of water or a sandwich or something. And we need to provide that. And you know what God did? God fed people. Jesus fed people, but He didn't also make them all line up and sign up for a Bible study. He just fed people. And because He did it so well and because of the way He did it, people just want to know, what is this about? So it may not be the homeless person you're feeding, but it may be somebody that sees you do it, that you may never know and may never see. Or it may be the person that you just put your arm around. My brother-in-law lives down in Houston. My Sabra's sister and her husband live in Houston. And they had an opportunity to go out and help people during the floods, and this woman was in shock. And the husband was trying to get help for her, and they said, what can we do? He said, just go sit by her. And all they did was go down and sit next to her and put their hand on her. And finally, just because of that touch, just because of that proximity, she looked up and began to come out of that. And then the amazing part is she said, Emil, they worked together years ago. What a coincidence, right? But because all he did was go and put his hand on somebody and just try to comfort somebody, that had a huge impact. It had a huge impact on him as much as it did on her. And so as we seek people out instead of projects, the other challenge is to just live Jesus. Just be Jesus. You know, Jesus never put up a banner and said, come to the synagogue on Saturday. Jesus went among the people and all the time served the people. And there were times when He didn't serve the people and He got away from the people, so what? So He could regroup, re-energize, and go back out and serve people. This is our boat. This is our hillside. This is our garden. This is not our sermon to the community. This is a time when we come together and we get ready to go back out. When we share war stories, when we help each other heal from scars that we've gotten, and then we get better and we go back out. That's where the battle's to be fought. We're to be fighting that battle and come here to regroup and encourage each other to go back out and fight that battle. We want you to come to church and we want you to be encouraged. That includes study. That includes learning. That includes being a family and knowing from each other. I learned from the littlest to the oldest about being Jesus. There's not a person in here that doesn't teach me something about being Jesus. If you teach a 4-year-old class, you will see Jesus. You'll sometimes see a few demons, but most of the time, you will see Jesus. You also will learn about families, things that you're not supposed to know. That's kind of interesting, too. The sheriff came when? When did the sheriff come to your house? But there's not a person in here on our best and worst day that doesn't show me Jesus. That's why we come together. That's why I love coming here and seeing you, because you encourage me. And you encourage me with your strength. And sometimes you encourage me in your weakness. When we can sit there and say, this is not easy. When we can say, I want to do more. Or when we can say, I'm just not up for doing right now. All those things are okay. But if we're called to be salt and light, then what we want to do is come here to refill. What we want to do is be here to go out. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of you, Steve. And so as we look at what can we do, We need to change our paradigm a little bit. There are so many opportunities from day to day for us to be salt and light to people. And if we understand that we may be just a little salt in their lives, but we're not all going to be all the salt they get. Or we may be the salt and light that sets the spark that makes people begin to change things, begin to see things, to be encouraged in a different way. But we may not see the fruit of that. But we're not called to see the fruit of that. We're called to be salt and light. We're called to make an impact. So even though people may not ask me, why are you like, well, people have always asked me, why are you like this? I knew I was going to catch y'all before y'all got to me. Why are you like this? You know, what's interesting is I go into schools and I just talk about dads and education and things. And every once in a while, and this, believe me, this is pretty rare, but people will say, I know you're a man of faith. And I'm like, why? Because I didn't use bad words? And I didn't use bad words, did I? I have to ask that sometimes. I did. And some people think that I have to be a person of faith just to work with parents, but I don't think that's the case. But people know, and I'm not doing anything special. I'm just not doing what some other people do. Like I said, I'm just hopefully having joy and hopefully having peace. That's when it hits me that, that's the easy part. That's what people notice. People don't want to be preached at. People want to live. People want to have love. They want to have peace. They want to have hope. And if you have that, and if you show that, that's when we begin to make an impact. That's when we become that salt. And so today what I would encourage you to do is think about those opportunities. I need to go out, and I need to have the strength to go out, and so I come here. So we are called to encourage one another. Let us not discount that. But when we come here, we're to build each other up so that we go out, not just to build each other up and stay in this building. Not just to keep coming back and patting ourselves on the back. But we need to be here so we can encourage each other, because there are people waiting for that message. There are people dying without it. There are people suffering. People that lost loved ones this week that have no hope. People that have had families fall apart right in front of them and don't have anywhere to go. People in a couple of states that lost everything they own, and there are some people right next to them that are okay with it because they know that's not where their future lies. And yet if you don't have that hope, then everything you've ever owned is gone, and now you don't know where else to go. And now there's people showing up helping us, and we have no idea why. Because Christ compels us. I pray if you need Christ, this is a family that wants you to know the Christ that we know, the Christ that saved us. If you need encouragement, if there's anything we can do to help you in your walk, won't you come as we stand and sing?